Well, friends, we just finished up our Endure series this summer as we bring the summer to a close, which was 3 weeks talking about the challenging aspects of our faith from 1st and 2nd Peter. And so we talked about enduring trials. We talked about enduring injustice. That was the week that Jeannie was sharing with us. And we talked about enduring death. And really the image that we laid over this whole Endure series comes from the New Testament word for endure, which is this idea of bearing up under weight. And if you remember that first week, we talked about how being a Christian a lot of times is like leg day, where we don't want to be top heavy Christians. We don't want to be all head and all heart. We want to have guts. We want to be centered. We want to be strong in our base and our foundation. And we really don't get to build those sorts of faith muscles unless, like First Peter talks about, we face various trials. That's where the tested genuineness of our faith is both revealed and cultivated. But it's hard when you're grieved by various trials, and yet Jesus says to do good in the midst of those trials. And that's what Jeannie had talked about too, in the midst of injustice. Sometimes being a Christian brings injustice, like it's because of your faith in Christ that unjust things happen to you. And Jesus says in the midst of that, continue to do good, continue to be an agent of justice in an unjust world. And this last sermon, we talked about how we as Christians endure death. We experience death different than everybody else. In fact, Jesus died once for sins. He, the righteous for the unrighteous, like 1 Peter 3 talks about. And in his death, he brings us to God. And so we have a different destination than everybody else. We don't live a dust to dust story. We live a dust to glory story. And so the motive for doing good in the midst of our trials, in the midst of our injustices, in the midst of the death that we face on a daily basis, the motivation for doing good is the glory on the other side of all this grief. And so as Christians, we are gutsy people. We're not just head and heart people. We're gutsy people. We have a strong foundation in Christ. And so when Jesus says, do as I do good on your way to glory. And when we do that, when we endure in the midst of trial and injustice and death, when we endure, it actually becomes one of the most evangelistic things about our faith. People take notice of that because we don't face trials like the rest of the world. We don't face injustice like the rest of the world. We don't die like the rest of the world. We have an eternal hope in Christ, and that glorious destination, that dust to glory story, changes everything about the way that we live in the present moment.